Today, I'm going to tell you about my great-grandmother. I always referred to her as Nana Hawkins. And for the last 4 years of her life, she lived in our house. This wasn't easy because it was only a 3-bedroomed house, and in order to accommodate her, she was given the biggest bedroom. My parents had to move into the middle bedroom. I had the smallest bedroom, and my brother's bed was in a curtained-off corner of the room my parents were using. But we made all of these modifications in order to give a charming lady a nice home. Besides her room, which was quite a good size, she had a sort of walk-in wardrobe. At least that's what it is intended to be. But my father had put in there for her a gas ring, a commode, a washstand with a jug and basin, and some cupboard space. She never ever referred to her room. She always referred to her set. The only time I've ever heard the use of the word set to mean a suite of rooms was that young men about town used to talk about having a set at the Albany. She did not become part of the family in the sense that you might expect. She was a small lady, always immaculately groomed, with a slight air of Maggie Smith about her. Whenever you went into her room, it always looked beautiful and never showed any signs of the fact that it was a bedroom. Some sort of transformation occurred every night before she went to bed, which I never witnessed, and by the time she was up and about in the daytime, the second transformation had put her room back to being a sitting room or a drawing room. I remember a nice embroidered quilt on the bed being tucked into an alcove with a pile of cushions along the long side of it so that it looked like a luxurious divan. She never entertained you except by appointment. If my brother and I wished to go and say hello to her, that was all right, providing we knocked at the door and waited until we were invited in. But she would from time to time invite one or other or both of us to come and take tea with her. Main meals were sometimes shared with us, the family, or sometimes my mother would take her main meals up on a tray. I never appreciated at the time, but of course one doesn't when one's a kid, how much work it involved for my mother. The story that I have to tell about her is, well, in retrospect, hilarious. It wasn't hilarious at the time. It was the only time I recollect that my mother and my nana had what you might call a falling out. And it was brought about by the fact that although she could boil a kettle and perhaps even make a little toast in her room, she couldn't cook in her room. And on one occasion she had taken it upon herself to make a little cake. And she had come to the kitchen, my mother's kitchen, and made the cake and put it in the oven. As it happened, my brother, in those days, still now, if he could, was a sportsman and a great tennis player. Only a little boy, you understand. And he was going to play in a tournament. And when he was gathering together his whites, his socks, the ones he wanted to wear, were still somewhat damp from the last time they had been washed. My mother, knowing that the oven was on, and it was only on at a low heat, put my brother's damp socks, clean damp socks, straight from being washed, in a tray and put them in the bottom of the oven. just as my grandmother came downstairs to see whether her little cake was done. She opened the oven door, looked unutterably mortified, said not a word, stormed back to her set, and quickly reappeared wearing her hat. This was because she never deemed it appropriate to go out without her hat. And where was she going? Well, not a very long journey. She was going from the stove in the kitchen to the dustbin in the garden. She retrieved her cake from the oven. She stormed out of the back door and with great ceremony threw the cake into the oven and put the lid back on, threw the cake into the bin and put the lid on the bin and came back in, exuding haughty indignation from every pore. She didn't say a word, and neither did my mother, because that would have been undignified. That brings us to Aunty Kath. Aunty Kath was wife of Uncle Ted. Uncle Ted was my father's elder brother. Aunty Kath was a charming, sunny lady, one who was a conciliator and always made things go smoothly if she possibly could. And she was vital to every party that our family ever had. Why? Because she had a talent that the rest of us didn't share. She could slice bread thinly, evenly, and neatly. And in the days before you could buy sliced bread, to have someone around who could make neat slices for sandwiches and the like was an invaluable commodity. So every time there was a tea party, nothing could start until Aunty Kath arrived, armed with her own knife, which she had used so many times that the middle of the blade had a waste where it had worn away, and I used to wait horror-stricken because I was sure that one day it would snap in two. She would almost always invariably also bring with her a trifle. She made extremely good trifles. They tasted very nice. They always tasted much nicer than they looked, because she took pleasure in sprinkling sugar hundreds and thousands on the top of her trifles for decoration. And she always sprinkled them on too soon, so that by the time the trifle had been wrapped in a tea towel and taken in a basket to whatever event it was going to grace, the sugar colouring had all run, and so whatever the design might have been, my Aunty Kath's trifles always had this sort of splurgy, muddy, pinky grey top to them. To this day, if I make trifles or flans that need decoration on the top, I leave the decoration to the very, very last minute before I serve things, because I do not want to suffer from the gloomy tops of Aunty Kath's otherwise delicious puddings. Aunty Kath was beautifully spoken, and also their house was very well appointed. Their house had a front room which was always cold and a bit sort of forbidding, and as I can recollect, only got used on very high days and holidays. It had within it my uncle's organ. In the days before one had electronic organs, someone had to pump it if he was going to play it. He was a church organist and a choirmaster in his spare time. The house also had a television, 14-inch screen, and had the television in time for the coronation. and their house also had a telephone. And Aunty Kath had a telephone voice that would shame Hyacinth Bucket, or rather Hyacinth Bouquet, if you could remember who that was. I honestly believed that in order to have a telephone, you had to have a telephone voice. I used to enjoy going to their house. I watched Quatermass on their little television, hiding behind the sofa, with my hands in front of my eyes but with my fingers spread apart, so that when the nasty bits came, I could close my fingers together and hide down behind the sofa. Ooh, it was so exciting to watch something that was scary. Aunty Kath had phrases. She always used to say, if something was bad, that it was something chronic. And not until I was a grown-up did I know that chronic meant something ongoing and long-lasting. I believed that it meant imminent, immediate, acute, and dreadful. She also was always trying to quieten the four of we kids. Four because there was me and my brother, my cousin Brenda, same age as me, and my cousin Diane, a little bit younger than her, but a bit older than my brother. We were competitive, all of us, and so when we were together, although we weren't riotous in a physical sense, we could be very noisy. And one of Aunty Kath's famous expressions was, "Why don't we all play a quiet game of Chinese checkers?" As I recall, we rarely ever did. I enjoyed my childhood. In telling you these tales, it would appear to be something of a sitcom. It didn't feel like that at the time, but it did feel happy. And I'll leave the last word to my mother. When I said that my mother was not very good at directions, she was very, very good at people and friendships. She made friends wherever she went and had the enviable talent of always being able to remember people's names and what they had been up to the last time she saw them, even if the gap was a long while. I once had to ask her, when I wanted to make a speech about my past boyfriends, who they all were, because she had stayed friends with all of them. Last story. At a tea party, my mother one day produced a pair of Y-fronts and asked the assembled men if they belonged to any of them. They all insisted that they did not, whereupon my mother said, "Oh, well, they must belong to that Dutchman I made friends with on a coach trip." There was silence and laughter, and no explanation was ever offered. If she didn't offer one, why should I? Bye-bye.